Okay, this is ecology video number 2. In this video we're going to be wrapping up population ecology and then moving into community ecology. So I'm just kind of go back to where I left off from video number 1. In video number 1 we were talking about S-shaped growth curves that can end up happening in populations as they go from originally being unlimited in the number of resources that are available. Unlimited resources means that population can grow exponentially for a period of time. But eventually in nature, a population is going to get to a point where there is something that is limiting the size of that population. And at that point, it limits out at what is called the carrying capacity, and the population births is equal to deaths. And so it doesn't grow anymore at that point once the population's reached carrying capacity, unless the amount of resources changes. All right, so that's where we left off. Moving on to the next idea, that's kind of a related idea, kind of a little secondary idea that's kind of interesting though, is the Ely effect. Like I mentioned before, in the logistic model, there's an assumption made that each individual added, as the population gets bigger, you end up with more and more individuals that you're competing with. So each individual then has a negative effect on the growth rate. But that isn't always the case for some populations. The Ely effect is a situation for when a population size falls too low that some aspect of their survival or their reproduction is harmed. So then they wouldn't be growing as fast as they would if there were at least a few more individuals. So this is something that's usually more of an issue on the very low end of the S-shaped growth curve. But for example, plants need other individuals around in order to be able to do their cross-pollination, if that's something that's necessary for a particular plant. And so you need to have enough individuals around that the pollen can get carried from one plant to the next, either by a pollinator like a bee or by wind. Another example of this very similar example just with animals, that they have to be able to find a mate in order to be able to reproduce, and if there are so few individuals that encountering a mate is something that they're not going to do very often, that actually is going to be a detriment on their potential exponential growth. And just another one, this one would be more about survival instead of just reproduction. A stand of trees gets some protection from the wind, just being all together and huddled like that, and without just being on your own is actually going to, you're more likely to end up dying from wind or other kinds of environmental variables. So that's the Ely effect. Okay, so if we're looking at those limiting factors that can hold the population at carrying capacity, we can classify those limiting factors as either being density-dependent limiting factors or density-independent limiting factors. Now, density-dependent limiting factors, they get more restrictive as the population size grows. So some of the most common density-dependent limiting factors are going to be, well, my favorite one, I guess, limiting factor, really. But the one that I always think about, because it's, I think, very strong, is disease. If you have more individuals in close quarters, a disease will spread more quickly, more readily. So disease gets to be a bigger and bigger problem as your population size grows. Another one that's density dependent, that's just a real common one to think about if you want to think about any limiting factor and just kind of get general understanding for how it works. Food. Food is also a density dependent limiting factor. It becomes more limiting as the population size increases. On the other hand, density independent limiting factors, they're going to restrict that population, so it may cause some deaths, even in a small population. So it's regardless of the current population density. Most of the time, density-independent limiting factors are usually things that are abiotic. Okay, so if you're unsure about something, that's something to pair together with this, and just understand that they tend to be things that are like natural catastrophes, like a flood. So if you have a flood in an area, it doesn't matter whether you have, we're dealing with some plant, it doesn't matter if you have 10 individuals there, if you have 100 individuals there, if the area is flooded, there's going to be death. So it's not like the problem gets worse because there are more individuals present. So a flood's a good example. Another example that would be density independent would be something like fire, a forest fire. That would also be density independent. Okay, so we can classify different types of populations as either being case-selected or being R-selected. Now, so there certainly are populations that fall somewhere in between these two, but we can subclassify some of these things. So case-selected life history strategy, these types of organisms, think K is carrying capacity, so they're going to have adaptations that allow them to be able to survive very well when that population is at carrying capacity. So they're going to maximize their success at high population density. So these populations are going to have particular adaptations that are going to make sure that they can get as much food as possible, or that they're more likely to be able to reproduce, because those are the things that are going to be a big deal in case-selected life history strategies. So efficient use of resources, because not having enough food is a problem when you're at carrying capacity. So being a very efficient organism is something that you're going to see in these organisms. They typically don't have a lot of babies. They tend to have just a few babies and put all of their energy into those couple of babies. So they put parental care in to help to increase their survival. It costs a lot of energy. Like these are not just, you know, teeny tiny little eggs that they're releasing. Sometimes there's a gestation period where they're carrying that baby internally for a period of time. Overall, case-selected species are large-bodied organisms with longer lifespans compared to the R-selected species organisms. So R-selected is going to be the flip side of the coin, kind of the other extreme, and there certainly are things that kind of fall somewhere in between as well. So R-selected are going to have adaptations. This is R, we're thinking about the rapid rate of growth. So they have adaptations that maximize success at low population density. So these are going to be things that have adaptations that allow them to be able to have lots of babies quickly when the opportunity, the times are good. So rapid reproduction. So they have lots of small offspring. They don't put as much energy into just one or two offspring. They put their energy into huge numbers of offspring. They don't spend their energy on parental care, not very much. So this is really good for species that are being opportunistic, because they live in environments that are not steady. Their environment is fluctuating, and so whether the environment can support, you know, X number of individuals can change over time. So once the times are good, they want to be able to reproduce real quickly and take advantage of good times. These do tend to be animals that have smaller bodies and mature quickly with a shorter lifespan. So if we think about particular examples of organisms that would be case-selected versus R-selected, think about that for a second. Case-selected species tend to be things like a bear or a wolf. Those types of animals that are very larger bodied, and the population doesn't change drastically from one season to the next. Whereas an R-selected species would be something that would be more like, well, let's say Daphnia. That Daphnia population in the wintertime is very low, but then when spring comes and there's food available for them, then that population really balloons. It goes real quickly. Mosquitoes are another example of an R-selected life history strategy that might go through multiple S-shaped growth curves even in a summer, depending upon, you know, they do really well when there's lots of rainfall and there's lots of puddles for the babies to be going through their juvenile stages and so on, so that those populations can fluctuate multiple times even during a single summer. There are many species that fall somewhere in between. So like think about something, you know, what would you think of like a small bird, like a chickadee or something like that? Is that a population that is R-selected or case-selected? They probably have some aspects that are kind of both, but you can't both have maximization. You can't maximize both. For example, efficient use of resources and spending every little bit of energy just for survival, and putting tons of energy into reproduction. That there's only so much energy that to go around, so it's like a pie chart. And so the K-selected species is going to spend a smaller amount of their energy on just reproduction, because they have to spend some of their energy on survival. Whereas the R-selected is going to be, the majority of what they're going to be doing. They live fast, die young. They put a lot of energy into having lots of babies quickly. The energy trade-off piece I just mentioned, reproduction versus survival, versus you can't have lots of big babies. You can't do that. That's something that you can't maximize for both. All right, so I think we're at about 11 minutes here. Actually, I'm going to cut off the video, just wrapped up population ecology, and I'm going to make a separate video for community ecology.